Pukuf, Apkintulelu, Tupache, Nortram Kawun, Incheta Eugenia Huisca, Quesauquen Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, MEU, Ka Mañún Fim, Sociedad de Turismo Mapuche, Tañi Mangelfiel. Buenas tardes a todos y a todas.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eugenia Huisca. I work at the Catholic University of Chile, and I would like to thank this invitation from the Mapuche Tourism Society to participate in this event. We will now start with this session from the Indigenous Tourism and Public Policies Forum called Necessary Adjustments and Relevant Considerations in Indigenous Tourism for Reactivation. Our speakers today are Richard Campbell, Chief of the Culture and Tourism Section of the Economic and Social Development Section from the OAS, Ignacio Mali, National Director of the National Association of Indigenous Tourism in Chile, Constanza Ayala, Ministry of Tourism, former Ministry of Tourism of Colombia. The session will be divided into two parts. First, a question will be made so that everyone can answer that, and then I will ask you a second question so that you can all answer them, and then we will provide for a space for a Q&A session.
La primera pregunta es,
the first question is, according to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and other UN organizations, they say that the roles of the states is crucial for the restoration of the indigenous cultures. According to your own experience, how can public policies associated to indigenous tourism guarantee the protection of the rights, territories, and resources of the communities? Nancy, floor is yours. Thank you very much. We, at the Secretariat of Tourism, we thank you for participating in this forum. It's a pleasure to participate here. We would like to send you the best greetings from our General Secretary. I would like to start off by saying some of the things that we're doing here at the Secretariat of Tourism, especially in the department that I work, sustainable tourism. As the Secretary says, we would like to say that at the Secretariat, we are carrying out a strategy called Mexico on a Sustainable Path, in which we have different projects and strategies which are intended for all these actions that are being undertaken in different places in Mexico, which intend to bring about sustainable development according to the 2030 agenda. This is a path that we need to follow as we understand it, and specifically any sections that help in complying with all this, but which use tourism as a tool for its compliance. So in this regard, and wanted to share all the things that we've been doing, we've come up with a plan for sustainable tourism in Mexico called Tlactloc. Tlactloc was the way in which governance was made in ancient ancestral communities. So in Mexico, to make it sustainable, we use this figure not just as a reminder of our folklore, but as an actual way of governance. So it is about reclaiming these rights, but also as a way to feel proud of everything that we've achieved. Thus far, in the Tlactloc, we have over 170 organizations, among them government, civil society, entrepreneurs, especially in indigenous matters. So this has helped for decision-making to be made in a more collective manner, so that they can all know about what we're doing and how they're incorporated into it. We also have the Corsatur project, which comes from the Mayan language, and it means goals. It aims to maintain biodiversity in coastal systems through the design and instrumentalization of policies in order to ensure sustainable tourism. In this project, we work with cooperatives and different associations in the region of the country. This project is located in 3 areas of Mexico: Baja California Sur, La Paz and Los Cabos, in Huatulco, Oaxaca, and Mayocan in Quintana Roo. To do that, we work with indigenous communities, the Mayans, the Apotecas, the Apericuelos, and the Ipiricues. And what we also want is to use their cosmovision, their world vision. We are taking into account all these ways of seeing life from our communities. We hope that this can bring up in all these communities. And another project that we also have regarding tourism for many of our indigenous communities is a project called Trails for Mexican Growth. These trails are basically hiking trails that can bring about experiences in order to get to know about these ancestral cultures and also get to know a little bit about their gastronomy and food. We intend to recover some of our origins within this trail that goes through 6 states of the Mexican land, Potomi, several different tribes that we've been working with. And an example of these trails, there are several routes, but one that I want to tell you about is the one that exists in Montezuma, which is the trail that over 500 years ago was led by the Paimanes to take the fresh fish from the coast of the north of Veracruz to their region. It goes through 6 states of the Republic. I think that you may know a little bit about it. We have a program called Magical Towns. It goes through 6 magical towns, which are World Heritage Sites, and it just recently won the Excellence Prize at the Fitur 2021 fair. So the idea is to continue promoting these types of action and to continue to replicate them as well. So these are just some examples to tell you that beyond theory, we will allow ourselves to be guided by the knowledge and wisdom of these peoples. Thank you, Nancy. So we now grant the floor to Richard. The floor is yours.
Yes, and good morning. Actually, it's good afternoon here as well. Yes, and thank you to the organizers for inviting the OAS to participate in this conference. And let me just say on my own behalf, it's a pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel and to be able to contribute to this conversation we're having on Indigenous tourism development, not only in the Americas, but to share with respect to the Asia Pacific region, and to share for us in the Americas, to share our experiences with the Asia Pacific region. Let me just start by saying Indigenous tourism policies are often developed on the notion of providing opportunities for social cohesion, social inclusion, and sustainable development. However, I think in carrying out these policies, it requires a complex task that involves various components. For example, it requires strategies that facilitate community enterprise and innovation. It also requires systems for monitoring and measurement of success and guidelines for, if you will, ensuring responsible and sustainable tourism. But I think most importantly, in the context of the conversation we're having, most importantly, it requires the active consultation with and participation of the Indigenous leaders from the communities that they represent. Indigenous tourism, in a sense, provides an opportunity for communities to share stories, to share traditions, and to share experiences with visitors, while giving the Indigenous communities and the people a voice and a way of educating outsiders about the past, about the present, and indeed about the truth. I think many governments in our region have sought to sort of create tourism policies to facilitate market growth and product development in the Indigenous market. or in the indigenous sector, if you will. And invariably, this is being brought through the framework or the prism of community-based tourism. In many of our countries, indigenous tourism tends to be community-based, and it's often rural. So there's this overlap, if you will, or significant overlap between indigenous tourism and community-based rural tourism. I think recognizing that there cannot be a one-size-fits-all for indigenous tourism, I think increases the probability that the policies which are designed to promote indigenous tourism can be tailored in such a way to ensure that indigenous rights and the resources of these communities are respected and indeed guaranteed. Many of our indigenous communities embrace the notion of tourism insofar as they understand tourism's capacity to contribute to economic development. And within this context, the policies which drive this economic development, I think, must underscore the diversity amongst indigenous groups. So, for example, they must recognize the concepts of land use on customary lands. And I think all of this is particularly important in the design of products and services in indigenous communities. Let me just say finally, with respect to this, this question, I think the policies which support indigenous tourism, if designed properly, and that is to say, they embrace notions of respect, responsibility, and sustainability. They can bolster employment and alleviate poverty, empower women and youth in indigenous communities, and all these good things. And in that sense, thoughtful policy design, therefore, goes a long way in ensuring that the resources of these communities remain within the ownership of these communities. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for your presentation. And now, Constanza. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure from the Colombian government to be attending this conference, and of course, learning more and more from our colleagues. Now, to tell you a little bit more about what we've been doing in Colombia, I'll just share my screen really quickly. And please let me know if you can see it. Now, why is it important for us to what is key within the context, the Colombian context, to progress on these public policy processes that may be linked to the development of our indigenous communities? First of all, it's important to say that based on our constitution from 1991, our ethnicities are stated to be fundamental actors for the process of development of the country. So in this regard, also linked to what Richard was saying, we try to view it from a comprehensive point of view. So anything that we do on tourism, we also try to tie in the different public policies that exist regarding our ethnic communities. In this regard, it's important to point out that our national development plan ties the processes of how to generate tourism in order to generate value under sustainable processes where communities are fundamental actors of this process, which can transform, create inclusiveness and equity, where we're providing more support to community tourism activities. By doing that, we can observe all these elements in our local tourism plan, seeing how we can develop these development processes and tourism planning processes and link that to generating sustainable processes for enhancing the quality of life of our communities. Now, I'm talking about any sort of community in the national territory. Now, of course, there is a very specific approach regarding our ethnic communities, and that is highlighted and the guidelines that we have come up with as a country, based on all the work that we've been doing with our ethnical groups in these approaches of equity, of revaluing and respecting, generating respect based on what all the ethnic communities want to develop. This has led to, in the past few years, us linking community tourism and community and tourism within our new law, where we want the communities that have been organized to be able to come up with a supply of tourist products and services, respecting their own internal processes regarding their own plans for their lives based on the proposals that they want to make for their territories, and to allow tourism to truly become a tool for sustainable development in their own territories. And of course, and this may lead to creating companies in our ethnic communities that bring about inclusive economic growth that respect everything that they wish to undertake. And that's why each public policy that's developed in the tourism sector, I'm going to show you just a few of the latest policies that we've been working on. The sustainable tourism policy, the tourism infrastructure policy, the cultural tourism um, policy, the nature tourism, community tourism, and all of these are linked to fundamental topics that relate to our ethnicities and communities. How can we value the culture through programs, through key projects, and fundamental plans where respect and equity are all part of the DNA of our public policies? Now, we realized that despite the fact that we had all these public policy processes, it was structurally important to work with our ethnic groups. We have about 115 indigenous peoples in Colombia, about 12,000 indigenous communities throughout the different regions. But each one of them has very specific life plans. The biggest macro region have their own specific traits. That's why we're starting to work with the representatives from our indigenous communities, revolving around an indigenous tourism policy that allows us to better specify these processes. This means that we'll be able to comprehensively manage a destination with very specific ties to our indigenous communities. And of course, this means that we need to know how we can generate those ties with environmental processes, with social processes, with educational processes, with infrastructure processes, in order to improve the living conditions of our indigenous population based on the proposals that they want to set forth, and especially looking after the heritage, both natural and cultural heritage, which our indigenous communities are the main actors that show us and lead the way in which we can effectively come up with transformation processes, regional transformation processes, by respecting and reconciling our actions. You know that we as a country were undergoing a very important reconciliation process with regards to peace. So working on this in a very specific manner with our indigenous communities is essential. We've been working on the comprehensive planning of the territories where we have indigenous communities that may want to work on this proposal for all their productive processes, and being able to truly progress in a sustainable manner in tourist services and products that ensure the respect and conservation of the traditions of their ancestral wisdom, and allow this to be part of the educational process that we conduct from the tourism sector. Now, we have very essential topics based on our entrepreneurial law. We see several tools that may allow us to work with the indigenous communities based on the promotion of their own economies. How do we relate this in a respectful manner and in an equitable manner with our ethnic communities through different organizations, community-based organizations that may lead to conducting collective business or maybe individual business, but we can all work around this planning and territorial organization that may allow us to take to the market different tourism products that have a high added value, that may enable to sophisticate and to differentiate Colombia's offer to the world. And in thus doing, this can also allow our ethnic communities to have clearer processes that are based on their own cosmovisions regarding how to strengthen the human capital to come up with competitive processes in the territories. Lastly, mentioning touching on what Richard mentioned, community tourism is a way to manage tourism. And for us, it's essential. That's why it is tied to the sustainable development goals with regards to how we could, through this organized community, respond to these individual and collective rights of our ethnic groups. And for us to be able to create an ecosystem that revolves around the development of tourism with the communities, which is aimed at ensuring that the comprehensive management of destinations can be tied into the overarching national innovation and competitiveness system that we have in the country, where we have ties to all the sectors and we try to integrate through different work nodes what it is that we can truly carry out with the territories and the different proposals that we should be prioritizing for each one of the sectors. And of course, in the planning processes that are being implemented at the local level and the national level. This leads us to, well, this public policy is embodied in different programs and projects that we conduct in the tourism sector, of course, with different entities, where we generate different processes based on entrepreneurship and innovation. We come up with process based on quality and sustainability. And of course, we can work on them based on how we can arrive at exporting some of the offers that are generated by our ethnic groups throughout the country. And how can we generate support processes for entrepreneurial development in these communities? That's how we, there are different topics that we've been working on, different themes, such as specific offers, and where through our National Tourism Fund, we've been coming up with different projects for quite specifically the indigenous tourism sector. Several indigenous tourism associations or representatives are being benefited by benefits by different training and education processes based on rural tourism, which leads us to culture, gastronomy, music, and different activities are related to nature-based tourism, and how can we help so that they can also gain access to funding and seed capital with a larger ecosystem in the national government through the national learning process with Fondo Emprender, where we provide seed capital so that they can continue to make strides in their work. Through these dynamics generated by the communities, we can tie tourism as a complementary process that may allow all the activities that they want to undertake to highlight the cultural and natural heritage and values that they have and allow them to become embedded in the productive chain in an adequate manner. Of course, these processes entail different processes where our communities didn't used to gain easy access in the past. So entities that we have, such as Colombia Productiva and others, they work side by side in order to ensure that we can include these communities into the tourism value chain. My apologies if I went a little bit further and in the time that was assigned. No, thank you, Constanza. We now grant the floor to Ignacio. Good afternoon. And thank you for the possibility of participating on the panel. I would like to thank every speaker that has gone before me, and I thank you for the question. Now, regarding regulation of indigenous tourism and the role of the state, we, as a national corporation of indigenous tourism, we have a role entrusted to us by the law, coordinating the actions of the state in order to favor indigenous peoples. And in tourism, this isn't something that we do by ourselves. We coordinate this with a national tourism service, Hernatur, and also with the tourism department from the Ministry of the Economy. We conduct joint actions which intend to directly benefit the people and communities of indigenous natures. So we do this by working and build. That's why, in order to rescue our heritage or archaeological sites that may have a tourism interest in the northern part of Chile, in San Pedro Atacama, just recently we opened, or well, rather reopened, the Bucara de Quito, a very important place for the Icarantai community. We do this in a coordinated way with the communities themselves, who are the ones that tell us their needs. They tell us what their priorities are, what we should focus on, and we coordinate all the necessary tools for their support. Regarding the territories and the resources, due to the diversity that we have in Chile and indigenous populations are acknowledged in the law. This varies a lot. We have the Rapa Nui people in Easter Island, the Ainara, Koya, Quechua, Tejita, Yicarantai, and the recently acknowledged Chango people in the northern part of Chile, the macro zone of the center south, got the Mapuche people, the largest ethnic group in our country, according to our census and according to the different certifications that the National Indigenous Tourism Development Association has. And we also have the Yaguan and Yahuenca peoples within our territories. So these differences of the people and the territories and geographical areas that they live in have led us to having different tools that have been differentiated in their application. The needs, the times of tourism in the north of Chile are different to the ones that take place in the south. Southern people are travelers, and to do that, we're working on different tools that may enable them to further develop and foster tourism related to their very strong relationship with the seas. Likewise in Chango, they are closely related to the seas. So that is why the tools that we have need and take into consideration these approaches that the communities themselves have stated. And from that point on, we collaboratively work with the indigenous communities. We listen to them, listen to their needs, and we coordinate with the different actors from the state, be it the central government or the local government, such as municipality in our country. Thank you very much, Ignacio, for presentation. We now go on to the second question. According to the UNWTO guide from 2021, COVID set out the historic highlighted the historic discrimination of indigenous people, and the recovery of tourism operations in the communities might take more time than in other places. So, based on the work of your institutions, how do you plan the reactivation of indigenous tourism under these conditions? Constanza?
Thank you very much, Eugenia. It's important to highlight that the Colombian government has worked hand in hand in an articulated fashion with all the stakeholders. Part of this means our indigenous community representatives, specifically on the consultation we have been undertaking on how to start making progress in the construction of public policies for indigenous tourism. In addition to this, there's something very important, which is that every tool that we have linked for the reactivation of this sector means or poses a giant effort for our communities. and surroundings? And how do these relate to clear enterprising initiatives? Of course, in our general tourism law, as well as this enterprising law, where we are clearly relating tools through our institution, and we promote them in order to ensure the proper tools for our Afro-descendant indigenous communities as well, which are part of the equation, to be able to continue working as we did before the pandemic. Like this, in a very timely manner, we're also doing technical assistance initiatives for those communities that have requested it in a clear manner and that want to develop touristic products and that also are willing to understand how to carry out a planning process for touristic development in their territories. So it means that in a short run, we are generating strategic products that are already creating value chains for international and local markets. We need to add something very important, which is that our processes for how, as a country, I don't know if you can see my screen, as a country, of course, we have linkages with our macro regions, and these macro regions also implies our diverse ethnic diversity. So for the Orinoquia, Amazonia, the mountain ridge, the Caribbean, all these regions are all working together on narratives. How can we offer better products and identify them? Where do we have communities with world visions that are very important? And how do we guard and protect these numerous territories? And how can we generate products either on cultural tourism, nature related tourism, ethnotourism that really allow us to move forward? And this really meant a very thorough work with communities and with territorial ethnicities, municipalities, different local villages, and this fits into the peace process that we have been undertaking as a country. And I think this allow us to really aim for strategic products that can be leading and developing our ethnic communities. Like this, we have done specific accompaniments or technical assistance for our Caribbean regions, also our Afro-descendant communities in the Caribbean region, in the Amazonia region as well. So we hope we can accompany more than 40 indigenous initiatives in the Colombian Amazonia, which is very broad and ample, and of course, which is each one of our regions. How can we, through our big macro regions, do these linkages? Lastly, I think it's important to mention this. Colombia generated the stamp check-in certificate, which is the only one that counts with the backup and support of the World Tourism Organization. And it's important that through this stamp, all the other initiatives can be certified. It's for free. And it's important, like this, we can further support the entrepreneurs in our country. So we have a long way ahead of us. The biggest challenge right now is to be able to combine all these actions and to include them in the public policy for tourism that we're building together with indigenous people. Thank you.
Richard, por favor, adelante.
Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eugenia. I think, excuse me, pardon me. I think in discussing the recovery and if you will, the adaptations necessary for the tourism sector, I think one thing is clear, and that is we must act collectively to ensure that indigenous tourism is not left behind. So any notion of a one size fits all, I think, must be quickly abandoned to embrace the reality that there may be need for dedicated policies to support indigenous tourism. For all of our countries, I think the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has been devastating, and indigenous communities and indigenous tourism have perhaps been disproportionately affected because of a confluence of factors, including the fact that some of these communities, they just lack the resources to appropriately respond or to provide the support to the businesses that have been affected in these communities. In the context of the impact of COVID-19 on tourism, the tourism sector in the Americas, the OS has and continues to facilitate the discourse on public policies which support the recovery of the tourism sector in the region. Last year, the onset of the pandemic in the spring of 2020, and in recognition of the fact that tourism was not only likely to be affected by the crisis, but to be, in a way, irrevocably changed by it. The OAS, together with the George Washington University and its International Institute of Tourism Studies and the US Bureau of Indian Affairs, convened a series of meetings, of webinars for the 3 separate subregions of the Americas. And these webinars focused on the effects of COVID-19 on indigenous communities. So we look specifically at the different subregions of the Americas and how COVID-19 was impacting these communities. Separately, the first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas was convened jointly again by the OAS, the US Department of Interior, and again the George Washington University. And it was convened over 5 days last fall in October 2020. And coming out of that Indigenous Tourism Forum, first Indigenous Tourism Forum, the Indigenous Tourism Collaborative of the Americas, came out of that. So there was a desire out of this to set up this collaborative. And the vision of this collaborative is to establish sort of a network, if you will, a network of indigenous leaders and tourism industry organizations to exchange ideas and experiences and to foster the dialogue to drive collaborative action, and including specifically in relation to COVID-19 recovery. The collaborative was actually formally launched just yesterday during the 25th Inter-American Congress of Ministers and High-Level Authorities of Tourism, which was held virtually and under the chairmanship of Paraguay yesterday. It will provide a space for indigenous communities to join together, to share the stories and to explore common solutions on the way forward and how to recover. I think going forward, it will be equally important that we continue to facilitate continuous discussions on some key issues. For example, how can tourism drive economic recovery post-COVID-19? Which tourism enterprises or which tourism experiences will be feasible for indigenous communities and be attractive to visitors post-COVID-19? So I think through these fora, the OS will continue to provide the space for the discourse on the recovery of tourism in the region, a recovery which therefore embraces equality and respect for all. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Richard. Damos inmediatamente el paso a Ignacio.
Thank you very much, Richard. We give the floor to Ignacio for his comments. Thank you, Eugenia. And let me do a brief presentation. As you can see in the picture, this reflects the way we're working. This is a Mapuche man from Pehuenche community harvesting fruits of the Araucaria, Pehuen. And the way he's doing so is with his feet on the ground, pointing upward to be able to sow his fruits. That's the way we also have been carrying out our work. Sorry, the image, it seems, is not visible. First of all, I would like to mention our main efforts that we implement them jointly, and we want to position them in order to really help indigenous tourism. First is strengthening, and this means having resources and subsidies, grant, to increase the infrastructure. I'm sorry, Ignacio, the image is not visible.
Ahora sí.
¿Se ve?
Ahora se ve el power.
La primera imagen la pudieron ver.
So this is the first image he was talking about. Yeah, this is the image I was mentioning with the way we're trying to do things. Is the analogy of the Huehuenche men that it's there picking fruits from the Araucaria. Coming back to our endeavors, I was saying strengthening, training, and dissemination. This is important. And regarding strengthening, sorry, we do it through funds that we make available for tourism for equipment and infrastructure. Regarding training, we're constantly supporting the indigenous communities for the proper execution of the projects, and dissemination is mainly marketing authenticity and also per project, specific projects that they can present to us to give them the funding. And lastly, we also have audiovisual support and materials to disseminate their campaigns. And something very important is support for specific activities that can be visible and that enable visibility and to focus. And media can also then focus on these activities of native populations. I want to talk about Pati Rapa Nui, which is activity of Easter Island, and also the Aymana activities that is done every summer in Iquique. This dissemination, we do it together with other specialized bodies that are the experts in tourism in our country. I would also like to highlight regarding the recovery of pandemic COVID-19, and is that fortunately, this has got us standing in our 2 feet. And because in 2020, and because we had good management, we had significant growth of our budget. Those are the figures are in US dollars, 1 million. Well, you can see the figures there. This is to strengthen touristic initiatives. We have 1.92% of increase in our budget for 2020. So this is good. This allowed us to be in a good position and to be solid. Again, the touristic sector has been widely affected, first of all, because of the lockdown and the restrictions for mobility, and also the trade that has been closed in our country. So of course, tourism has been affected because of mobility restrictions, and also because there's a restriction on crowds getting together. So we do have resources to fund infrastructure initiatives. So we have been able to fund great projects that will allow the indigenous population to receive their tourists in a good facility with good conditions, and also to have this social distancing that we have to guarantee post-pandemia. This will allow us to improve our figures and our data regarding strengthening equipment, and we've been able to benefit 776 final beneficiaries or direct beneficiaries. And this is what we can say regarding the investment of indigenous tourism. And to end, I would like to mention the 3 positioning strategies for indigenous tourism. This work, we've done it as I responded in the previous question, joint and coordinated work. We first of all have the training of the market ready format that the Undersecretary of Tourism has brought this Canadian model and we have applied in Chile. It's a methodology that guarantees the authenticity and the marketing of all our initiatives. And this has been worked jointly and has been led by the organizations and associations of Indigenous tourism. On the other hand, we have an Indigenous tourism stamp or certification to really guarantee this quality and to add value in our country. The main touristic zones have Indigenous territories that need to be acknowledged and valued, and this is what we're trying to do. And just to conclude, the third positioning action is related to the Indigenous Tourism Dissemination Campaign, giving a voice to the main stakeholders that invite them to know the origins of indigenous populations. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ignacio. Ahora te pido muchas...
Thank you, Ignacio. Nancy, please be very brief, and then we adjourn the session. Thank you. Answering the question. We need to respect and be loyal to the authenticity of indigenous populations. So now more than ever, we have hope that tourism will enable and support the growth of indigenous populations and to see it as an activity that can integrate to all the value chains. As mentioned by Richard, this is changing. People are looking for different things now. People want nature. People want natural and authentic. And I think now more than ever, we need to preserve our roots and this indigenous heritage and the value to Mother Earth. They taught us to love Mother Earth. They've done it all the time. We need to take care, we need to guard, we need to protect Earth. And that's more obvious than ever. And there's other people that want to keep on doing traditional tourism, which is okay. But there are others that are more aware and more sensitized. And that's why we really want to attract those tourists that value and treasure, and we want them to be visiting our communities. We need to rethink the strategy, reorganize the way in which tourism has been done, not to leave anybody behind. As the 2030 agenda states, we need to really take into account the opinions of all to assure that the benefits of tourism reach all the regions, which is exactly what we're doing in Mexico. And finally, I would like to comment that this work we do in the Tourism Secretariat, we are undertaking organizing programs that have to do with economic support, economic funding. There's a program called Reactivation of Tourism Activity. It's a program implemented by EMPA. It's a government organization together with the Twicker Foundation, a German organization, GTZ. And we are together helping 175 Mexican companies with 9,000 euros, where we give this economic resource, but also workshops for companies to adapt their businesses and survive the pandemic and help them through this critical stage that the world is facing. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Nancy, por su exposición. Estamos
Thank you,
finalizando.
Nancy, for your presentation. We are adjourning this section. Thank you so much, spokespersons, for your important contributions and comments, where indigenous tourism needs to be reinforced by community governance, support to diversity, sustainable development, active participation of community leaders of indigenous territories, and other strategies that can contribute to the reactivation of this important sector. Now, I would like to invite you all that at 3 o'clock there's a symposium of Indigenous tourism in times of crisis and resilience, and then invite you to a closing ceremony with our host partners. Thank you.
Muchas gracias y un gran abrazo para todos.
Thank you. Hugs to all.
Muchas gracias, un placer.
Gracias.
Hasta luego.